My name is Liam Lacey. I'm Director of the Irish Maritime Development Office. We are currently the Pillar Coordinator for Pillar 1 in the Atlantic Strategy, and it's our great privilege and pleasure to be in that position. I'm delighted to welcome you to this connectivity workshop, which is entitled Staying Connected for Trade, Tourism and Economic Growth. It's the third in a series of 4 workshops that we have been running as part of our role as Pillar Coordinator. The previous 2 were on the subjects of digitalisation and ports as hubs for business. And I think as we go through the connectivity workshop this morning, you'll see how the subject matter of the previous workshops links in to the subject we're discussing this morning. Again, I want to thank you all for participating. I'm delighted that we have such an illustrious group of speakers this morning. They're here to talk about this very interesting and relevant topic. I'm pleased that we have representatives from across the Atlantic states participating today, which is indicative of the transnational nature of the Atlantic strategy and the need to coordinate and collaborate to achieve our stated ambitions. I'm also very pleased that we're joined by Linus Voskerides from the European Commission, from the Maritime Affairs and Fisheries area. Connectivity has received a great deal of attention in recent times, and it has become somewhat pervasive in terms of maritime policy and funding mechanisms within the EU. We have learned lessons over the past 2 years because of what we have experienced in relation to Brexit and COVID-19 about how important maritime connectivity is. We have learned a great deal about how we can and should increase the resilience of maritime transport services on which we are so heavily dependent, not only in Ireland as an island nation, but right across the European Union. Maritime connectivity is important for trade, for tourism, and for economic growth. When we talk about connectivity, we're not only talking about connectivity in the context of the assets we use in our ports and shipping services and the supporting infrastructure that facilitates maritime transport. Increasingly, we're talking about connectivity from a digital point of view, digitalization that can help us to use the very expensive maritime assets that we have more efficiently, to drive competitiveness and to remain connected. Maritime connectivity can also contribute to the achievement of climate change targets because maritime transport as and of itself is greener than alternative modes of transport and can become even greener still through the use of alternative fuels and electrical power while the use of electrical power while vessels are in port. All of these topics combine to create a very fertile landscape for the ideas and views that will be expressed by our panelists in the course of the workshop, and I am eagerly looking forward to hearing what they have to say. You have the agenda for this morning's event, so I won't dwell on that. Briefly, it's arranged around 2 panel discussions. The first discussion will focus on connectivity in relation to trade, and the second one will concentrate on tourism. Could I remind you that you have the opportunity to participate in the event through the use of the Slido app, which will appear from time to time on your screen. So now to get proceedings underway, I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague, Dr. Adele O'Connor. Adele is Business Development Manager with the Irish Maritime Development Office. Good morning, Adele, and may I hand over to you to get the first panel discussion underway and take us up to the coffee break. Thank you.
Good morning, Liam, and thank you for that introduction. Good morning, everybody. Delighted that you can join us here this morning for our first panel discussion on trade. We're delighted to have an excellent panel of speakers here that will give us a very wide perspective of views, touching on a number of key areas that Liam mentioned. So, for example, our panelists will touch on the role of ports, in particular regional or comprehensive ports, in facilitating trade and how that role might evolve. The role of the port in supporting climate policy and decarbonisation, how the clustering and cooperation between ports can help to realise these goals, and the digital and physical infrastructure upgrades that will be required in the near term. And we also need to bear in mind that the role of ports is evolving, particularly in relation to emerging industries such as alternative fuels and offshore renewable energy. So our panel this morning consists of Mr. Daniel Fallon Bailey, Economic Advisor and Policy Specialist at the Irish Maritime Development Office. We're delighted to have Mr. Frank Ronan, the CEO of the Port of Waterford, Professor Lourdes Trujillo, Applied Economic Analysis Department at the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canarias, Ms. Rosita Mahoney, Senior Economic Development Officer with Donegal County Council, Professor Regina Salvador, Geography and Regional Planning at University Nova de Lisboa, and Mr. Linos Voskarides from DG Maritime Affairs and Fisheries at the European Commission. So we have a fantastic panel with a number of perspectives with which they can contribute to these really important topics. And we also want to make sure that the audience gets involved. So the way the panel will structure is each of our panelists will give you approximately a 5-minute overview, and then we will move into discussion. And if you do have questions for our panelists, you can submit them through Slido. So Savas is going to just share on the screen how you can access Slido and submit your questions.
Thank you, Adele. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to the panel and to the attendees. A very short introduction to Slido. As you can see on the screen, to submit your questions, you either join Slido through the web browser at slido.com and use the hashtag ports3pillar 2021, or you can simply scan the QR code and it will direct you to the event page where you can submit your questions there. I will leave it on the screen for a second so everyone can see it. And whenever you're ready, we can move on to the presentations.
That's great. Thank you, Sava. So that's hashtag ports3pillar 2021. Our first speaker this morning, Daniel Fallon Bailey, is an economic advisor and policy specialist at the Irish Maritime Development Office. And Danny has been looking at particularly trade patterns and how they have changed in recent times in relation to COVID and Brexit. And I guess a lot of the patterns that Danny will have seen will also be relevant in other Atlantic member states. So we're delighted to have Danny here this morning to give us some background and context into what he has seen over the last few months. Danny, good morning.
Hi Dale, thanks very much. And I'll just share the presentation here. So as Adele mentioned there's been a couple of challenges over the last 18 months and it's been very unprecedented time for the Irish maritime market. And what I'm going to talk about today is the importance of connectivity in facing down those two challenges of Brexit and COVID-19. The two of them overlapped at times, and at different points throughout the last 18 months, there was some very significant concerns, and we're going to look at the role of connectivity in alleviating those concerns. So the contents here, we're going to just position the INBO economics team and give an overview of what I do and what the economics team at the INBO does. And then we'll go on to those two challenges, as I mentioned, of COVID-19, particularly that first wave in March and April of 2020, when very little was known and very little protocols were in place at the time as everyone was trying to get to grips with what was very unprecedented. And then moving on to Brexit after the first wave of COVID-19, attention's very much turned to Brexit and the end of the transition period at the end of December 2021 or 2020. So after all that, we've learned an awful lot. We've collected an awful lot of data at the IMDO. We would usually go on a monthly basis before 2020, but now we moved down to a weekly basis throughout in order to understand these challenges as they occurred. And then I'll give a brief overview of the current state of maritime traffic as we see it up to August 2021. So just to give an overview of the IMDO economics team, what we essentially do is mine the Irish shipping market. And by that I mean we monitor data across all the sectors, identify trends in them, we notify the department of such trends, and we curate our advice And by publicising all our quarterly and annual reports, we contribute to knowledge sharing and investment in the industry, and hopefully develop the industry as well. And in terms of positioning the IMDO economics team in the context of these challenges that were faced in the Irish maritime market, we would see ourselves at the intersection of Department of Transport policy and shipping market failure. The Department of Transport is obviously, its policy is to ensure connectivity, not only for the essential food and medicine purposes, but also for promoting economic trade and growth. So in that sense, connectivity is in the strategic national interest. When facing down challenges such as those of the last 18 months, shipping markets will look to serve their own interest and maximise profits, reduce costs, and if a route is unviable, it will be discontinued. So if enough of that happens, then it will run contrary to Department of Transport policy. So the IMDO economics team tries to sit at the intersection of those two things and hopefully give a good analysis and advice and curate our advice. So in that context of market failure, the risk of market failure over the last 18 months was significantly heightened because of these two events. And the unique element of these two events of COVID-19 and Brexit was that they both affect demand and capacity simultaneously. So in terms of COVID-19, the demand factor is obviously through the widespread closures of shops and factories and restaurants, and then through capacity, and particularly back in March and April of 2020, terminal outbreaks, key staff illnesses, and the quarantining factor. Very little protocol was known. It was still being teased out at the time, and we understand much more now about what the protocols are if those things were to occur. Back then, very little was known, and it was a time of great uncertainty about whether or not capacity could be maintained at different terminals. On the Brexit side of things, capacity is affected through customs checks and the fear, and again, I come back to the heightened uncertainty leading up to the end of that transition period, and the fears of significant backlogs and a breakdown in supply chains, and then through demand, because any tariff barriers or barriers to trade will affect demand. So in the context of those two things, how significant is maritime connectivity and route choice when facing down these challenges? And that's the key question that I'd like to answer here today. So moving to the first of these two challenges in COVID-19, if you can see the graph here, before COVID-19 struck, so roughly over 2019-2020, Ireland had a robust mix of EU and GB connectivity. This is a map of Ireland's RoRo connectivity just prior to COVID-19. And predominantly these EU routes here were mainly for tourism purposes. They about 80 to 85% of all RoRo traffic was moving on Ireland GB routes, as we would refer to them. This graph here shows what the concern was at that time. So widespread store closures, falling passenger numbers meant that RoPax routes were in danger of discontinuation. And this very much exhibits what the worst case scenario would have looked like. And those EU routes that would have relied heavily on the tourism market were in significant danger at the time due to the falling passenger numbers or non-existence of passenger numbers at that time. So Ireland was, or the Irish maritime sector was facing down considerable challenges. And just to illustrate them, the key point was a single point of failure. The lack of connectivity would have highlighted a single point of failure out of Dublin Port. There was still very little known. There wasn't protocols in place for what to do in these scenarios. They were still being drawn up. And the routes that were in danger of discontinuation could have been the first of many to fall away. And if these peripheral routes fell, Irish shipping market, as I mentioned, was facing a single point of failure. But not only that, it would have been losing direct EU connectivity in only a few months before Brexit occurred. So these were the uncertainties that were faced back in March and April of 2020. And just to illustrate what the passenger numbers looked like, and this is what the operators were facing back then. And you can see those precipitous declines in passenger numbers and almost non-existent in April and May. So with all that taken into account, the unforeseeable and unpredictable nature of COVID-19, the single point of failure, the loss of direct services in the run-up to Brexit, and the reduced competition when services fail, meant that there was a role for state support at this time. And the IMDO recommended that it be targeted, time-bound, and efficient in the sense that it doesn't aid profitability. So very much the reasons for intervention at that point outweighed the potential market distortion that intervention can often bring. So a PSO mechanism was put in place to maintain connectivity at this very important time. It lasted for about 12 weeks, at which point Ro-Ro traffic had recovered somewhat as the country reopened, not only in Ireland but across Europe. And then the IMDO recommended that it had served its purpose, and it was discontinued after 12 weeks. Moving on then, tensions very quickly turned to Brexit after that initial COVID-19 wave. And the threat here with Brexit was very much this 150,000 HTVs that would have used the land bridge. Now, we estimated it was probably about 150,000, or it could have been up to 170,000 HTVs per year as per an 2018 study. So the question was at this time, how much of this would like to divert to direct EU services in order to avoid these custom checks at either side of the land bridge route, and would there be sufficient capacity?
1 minute to finish, Danny.
Yeah. So sorry about that, Adele. This was very much the concern at that time, and then what happened after that was the unprecedented industry response to Brexit. We had 25 separate interventions, all for incumbent rower shipping operators, and we also had a new entrant. So there was very much, although state intervention was considered at that time, it was very much an industry-led response, and the industry had time to think about this. They very much showed their resilience in providing all the significant amount of weekly services, as we can see illustrated here. And so at this point in time, the cost of inaction was lowered. The appetite in the market to satisfy that direct demand was there, and then sure enough, these are the volumes that followed on direct EU services. So we can see thereafter at the end of December, the EU services doubled from about 3,500 to 7,000 per week on direct EU services. I'll just fast forward here to the lessons learned, and this is really what we take from this. And connectivity underpins the response to both COVID-19 and Brexit. And these events have highlighted the importance of route choice, openness to new entrants, and the coordination with stakeholders. One key characteristic to come out of this was the modal substitutability, and it's clear that services offered by both Lolo and Ro-Ro sectors can be effective substitutes for one another, and that shipping operators compete for similar business. Lolo volumes should not be discounted here, and it was clear that the demand for by importers and exporters to access EU markets directly was found in the Lolo market as well, and accompanied, unaccompanied and Lolo traffic compete with one another and are effective substitutes for one another. And overall, the Northern Irish issue as well, there was a significant amount of Northern Irish traffic that would have made use of Dublin Port, which has seen some of that return to Northern Ireland. However, the vast majority of that displaced land bridge traffic has found its way onto direct services as a result of the increased connectivity. So we can see here, and I'll just finish with this point, which is the resilient port sector with sufficient connectivity can be characterized as having these separate different themes, and these are the kind of things that we have learned over the last year. There needs to be room for an industry-led response if the industry has the appetite to do so. State support was required, and there is room for that when it was required back in that early wave of COVID-19. Sufficient route choice, modal substitutability, and low barriers to entry are very, very important. And not only that, but diverse destinations across the GB and EU are adding to the resilience of the port sector in Ireland at the moment, and allowing it to have sufficient connectivity. So overall, this connectivity is what underpinned our responses to these two challenges of COVID-19 and Brexit. So there you go, Adele. If you have any questions.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you for that. And I think your presentation really highlights the importance of our ports and the resilience that the port sector showed throughout two major crises that, you know, one of which was very unanticipated, particularly in relation to COVID-19. And the two of these were very unforeseen, you know, or I suppose never before seen events. And for the two of them to happen in parallel just shows the resilience of our port sector and the importance of our port sector in facing those challenges. So thank you, Danny. Moving on to Mr. Frank Ronan, the CEO of the Port of Waterford, which is a nice follow on from Danny's presentation. Frank will give us the perspective now of one of Ireland's comprehensive ports, the Port of Waterford. Good morning, Frank.
Hello, Adele. Good morning to you, and good morning to everybody. And hi to Liam as well. And thank you, Liam, for inviting me on here to speak and give a perspective. And I'm trying to bring up my slideshow there, but it's not popping up for me. Are you seeing that, folks?
We can see the slide, Frank.
Okay. Well, that's strange. I can't. Any help there?
Savas, can you?
Yeah. Maybe need to go back a bit.
We can see them. Let me just reset it then, and you can present it again. Try now, please. Yep, you can see it.
Yeah, I'm not getting it, Savas. Unfortunately, I'm getting actually the event invitation coming up for me.
Try sharing your screen maybe instead of the. Try sharing your screen maybe instead of the file, so you can have access to the slide yourself.
No.
Okay, let me present then for you.
Please do that, Savas. That was very helpful. Apologies.
Apologies for the delay. Just give me a second.
Thank you, Savas. That's great. It's coming up there now.
Okay, folks, and again, sorry about that. Welcome.
Thanks,
Good
Frank.
morning, everybody, from the sunny southeast of Ireland. We're in the bottom right-hand corner. I'm just going to provide you with a very, very severely cut-down presentation to introduce our port and give you a sense, I suppose, of where I'm coming from. I'm delighted to get a chance to kind of talk about our view of the world. So Port of Waterford is one of the 5 ports of national significance within Ireland. We're a comprehensive port on the 10T network. We facilitate economic growth and prosperity for our region and a little bit further afield. And maybe most importantly in these presentation, you know, you have an image there of the port and an image there of our office buildings. You got Anthony and Noel at the top tying something on. Next slide, please, Savas, if you could. And again, port guys really love numbers and we love talking about volumes and tons and boxes. So we've got to do a little bit of that just very briefly. Our throughputs in our bulk side of our business, which is the main side of our business, 1.5 to 2 million tons of bulk imports, very much agri-supporting, animal feeds, fertilizers, supporting the dairy and beef sector in Ireland, steel, timber, cement. We export some RDF. We have a container terminal, small container terminal here. Was you know, with I suppose a lot of capacity, but at the moment we're putting through about 50,000 TEU short sea connections to Rotterdam and Amsterdam with our friends from DFDS and Samskip. Capacity and rail connections, I think, would be a key attribute in our low offering. Project cargo, we will handle onshore wind modules, and we see ourselves playing a role in offshore support. Next slide, please, Sebas. Again, I'm trying to, I suppose, give you a picture here of Port of Waterford, and there's no better way to do that than with, you know, some images. And you can see bulk ships, bulk cranes, gantry cranes, trucks, windmill blades, towers, boxes, etc. And that really, in essence, you know, when you boil it down, in its very basics, what ports do, we unload and unload ships, and that gives you some, I suppose, a feel for what is our estuary port here in the southeast. Thanks, Savas. So again, and just to chat through what's on my mind here. And again, I'm kind of subliminal message not, and we've got a nice picture of a train there under a gantry crane, so it's something that's very close to our hearts. Our port roles, and Daniel has kind of set the scene really well. And I think ports have suddenly become de rigueur, much better understood than ever. Brexit really for the island of Ireland brought us into, you know, into context and made us very, you know, the crucial element of what we do. And that handover, crossover element. And the pandemic, I think, exacerbated that and excelled that. So we now, I suppose, see trade somewhat differently. There has been an impact on supply chains. There has been an impact on trade. Daniel has looked back, and I think we have a lot to learn from that. But the real issue, of course, is looking forward and what has changed and what is going to change even further. I think the Brexit impact is actually still changing. I think there's still some transfer going on and change of modes and change of routes. Supply chains certainly have been really heavily impacted, particularly on the global side, by the pandemic. And I think the impact of that is going to be with us for years to come. So we're seeing more and more uncertainty, I think, in our markets and what happens in the kind of the wider world. And we have to wonder, I think, really about nearshoring and how supply chains will work into the future. Digitalisation is something that's been discussed by the group. And we talk about the opportunity to improve in terms of congestion and carbon footing and maybe doing things better. Sometimes I'm a little bit negative about that, and I sometimes wonder, does the digitalisation we currently use actually act as an inhibitor and actually kind of a restraint to change? And I think we need to think about digitalisation and how we can use it to open up and see the world in a different way and actually seek out new opportunities. I think there's a long way to go there. Our regional ports, we do offer alternatives to the main highways. The main, I put in flexible and holistic, and after I sent that off to Adele and the guys, I kind of said, what am I trying to say here? Holistic, which is not a good sign. So I was trying to examine my conscience there. I can't really claim holistic for regional ports. As we look around Europe, look around the world, we see ports trying really hard to be holistic, trying to engage with their communities, with their cultures, with their heritage, with our environmental footprint, our ecology, our communities. So I'm not claiming that space, but I think in our regional ports, maybe we have an opportunity, the space, the time, I won't say the leisure, but the time and the ability maybe to do things a little bit differently, to experiment a little bit more. Our attitude in Waterford, for instance, and just as an example, when we look around our world here in Ireland, is we can say, well, if we make a mistake in Waterford, it's embarrassing, whereas if my buddies in Dublin Port make a mistake, it's a national catastrophe. So the pressure on us to keep doing what we do day in, day out is a little bit less, and our ability to look around us perhaps and try and think about what society needs and where we need to go and what the future holds, and to try different things and to find different niches. I think we have an ability in that space. I think it's something worth thinking about. Under development, I think ports over the world act as hubs and enablers. It's what we do, and this port is interesting. It's only been here for probably 25, 30 years since the port moved to its current location from the city of Waterford. And in that time, a really interesting, hub has developed around us, and we might talk about that later on. But it's amazing what happens in a relatively short period of time in the timelines that ports think about, a relatively short period of time. And we've mentioned already the changing nature of trade, and I think that's really what we need to think about. Where is it going? What's happening? And trying to see what the future holds for us in the port game is really difficult. The crystal balls we use are no better. Our ability to forecast the future is no better than anybody else's. But we've got to get the help of everybody we can to try and think about, what we do and are we designed to actually meet the needs of the future for our society, for our countries, for whatever. And I think climate is going to be the big driver. I think I'm just stating the obvious, but I think for all of us, I think the climate situation is going to dictate a huge amount of what we do for the next generation, how we behave, the services we offer. I think the nature of trade flows, the nature of connectivity, and I think we have a huge responsibility in that space. And I think it's a space that regional ports have a particular role to play because we have maybe the freedom space, the physical and geographical space to play a role there. So Adele, again, apologies for losing the presentation at the start, but that's puts me in, I think, a context, I hope, and you didn't even give me a 1 minute warning, which is...
Frank, you're spot on time. So
thank you, Adele.
Thank you so much for that, and thank you for that excellent overview. And you've really hit on a number of things there that I'm looking forward to discussing further in the panel discussion. And, the importance of comprehensive ports on facilitating economic growth and prosperity in the region. But I think you touched on a number of issues there that I think are really important as well. And, looking at digitalisation in new ways and how it can make us think differently. And I think that will really link into climate change and trade flows and connectivity. And you talked also about ports being enablers. And, you know, we also need to ask the question as how ports can be enabled to do that. So, so I think there's lots of food for thought there. So thank you, Frank, for raising that. Okay, so we're moving on now to the Grand Canaries, and I would like to welcome Professor Lourdes Trujillo from the Applied Economic Analysis Department in the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. So I'm looking forward to your presentation, Lourdes, to give us the perspective from the Gran Canaries.
You have the presentation there, or I can put? You put or I put?
Savas, do you want to share, Savas, or?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Can you see my presentation now?
You can now.
Yes, you can see that now.
You can see my presentation.
Yes.
Okay. So I am going to start. I can't see anything. I see only my presentation, but I don't see your faces.
I
but
have
it's okay.
presented the presentation myself, so if you can close yours and continue on the WebEx application.
Okay, but okay. Okay. Now, first of all, I want to thank the organization for inviting me to this interesting workshop. I understood there are only 2 or 3 slides, so the presentation. So I have seen several slides, but I hope it's okay in this way. Whatever question later, okay. I am the Professor Lourdes Trujillo. I am a professor of economics in the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. Also, I am member of the Department of Applied Economics in this university. I'm also a part of the research team in economy of infrastructure, transport and tourism, EITT. I am director of maritime port Mar. I will talk about Port Mar later. So I represent also my university in the Canary Island Maritime Cluster and the Transport and Logistics Cluster. Why I say that? Because the very important organization in the sense there are a group of the different companies relationship with the sector. And also I participate as a coordinator in the German-American International Workshop of Maritime Transport and Logistics. So I have a consultant with the World Bank, with the African Development Bank, because we are in Africa. So it's very and different organization like a state port or a port authority. My research is basically focused on maritime transport and port sector. I have published in large number of articles and in specialized journals. So my research team, Economy of Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism, EITT, is made up of a group of researchers in economic analysis. The main line of research of the EITT team can be summarized as economic analysis of infrastructure, especially in transport infrastructure, of course, economic analysis of transport services and modes, every mode, maritime, air, roads or shipping, this is a combined mode. Also economic analysis of the tourism in several aspects, theoretical and empirical analysis of demand, for costing of the demand, etc. We have a nice group inside of my team. They are going to be present in the next panel. And also I am the director of Port Maritime Port Mar chair. I talk a little bit about the Port Mar. Why don't change? Okay, now. The Port Mar chair was formed as a project of my research team, EIT team. Is it started in 2019. At the end of 2019 was not really nice date, but anybody or nobody was going to know what happened later. No, so we signed an agreement between the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria and our sponsor. Among the completed sponsoring this project are the Las Palmas Port Authority. Of course, they are very important in the sector, no? The Port Authority. The second is a shipper company, Astilleros Canarios, Asticam, is a leader in naval repairs, and also is very important in Spain and also in Europe, Asticam. And the third one is the foundation of Mafre Guararteme. In reality, it's an insured company, but they are is very interesting in training. So this sector is very interesting for that. One of the shared objectives, or the main shared objective, is to make known the diversity and richness of the maritime port sector that ranges from ship repair industry to bunkering through all the essential services provided by the port. Few people are aware that 95% of the merchandise that enter in Canary Island does so by sea. This characteristic endows the port with a great diversity of activities where the island economy is developing and stimulated. Therefore, it is a good source of job creation. It is also
1 minute to finish, Lourdes.
I'm sorry?
Just 1 minute to finish.
What minute? It's 5 minutes. I think 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It's also evident that this sector is integrated into the blue economy, which is a priority in the developing strategy for the Canary Island, sponsored by the European Union. The child reached to pass training through seminars and conferences, for example, one of the most recent logistical backbone of the Canadian economy, and research, of course, support of agreement and competitive project, among others. We have indicators for efficiency and connectivity, and application to maritime transport in Spain, and another one, challenge of the Canadian port, environmental depth and connectivity. Python script, this is my work on Python script, we are completed that allow preparing all the basic elements of port connectivity indices, because we are working now in the new connectivity indices. Another, we have several collaborators, like the two clusters I talked before. So we are central. We have several projects in blue economy, sustainability, efficiency, connectivity, sea science, and sources shipping. And finally, the next one, please. Why don't we have to change? Okay. This is a little bit, only 3 minutes for that. In this scheme, I want to present a general vision of the economy and how some of the concepts we are inserted. The problem of the COVID crisis caused people to be confined or sick, therefore they can neither consume demand side and nor produce supply side. So the direct impact caused by the disease caused indirect and induced reaction. In this way, the wave expand and produce an economic crisis, in this case caused for the pandemic. This consequence affects all the sector, primary, secondary, and tertiary, and of course, maritime transport sector. For the demand side, the objective here is to devise policies that stimulate or motivate the demand. For example, in the tourist demand, investigate what is happening in the country that generate tourists, or investigate into the air maritime transport sector because they bring tourists here. In local demand, for example, training policy that stimulate employment in the Canary is curious, because in the Canary Island, the low qualification in languages is striking, despite the characteristic of a tourist destination that the island represents. In short, projects that result in appropriate policy that support demand.
Lourdes, unfortunately, we're going to have to close the presentation there.
Yeah, okay. I am going to talk about the. Okay, I bring and I
yes,
go to,
and we'll move. And thank you so much for that overview. And what we will do is, we'll touch on this again in the panel discussion. Is that okay?
Okay, I going to talk only 2 minutes about maritime transport. Maritime transport is the key factor in the economic and the fundamental part of the logistic in the territory like Canary Island. Taking into account the maritime transport move 80% of the world trade, it is estimated that this mode of transport is essential for the economy. In addition, 95% of the merchandise that enter in Canary Island does so by sea. Therefore, ports are the gateway to commerce. Consequently, a lot of activity are generated in the port that not only have to do with essential services, but also with other fundamental business, such as bunkering and naval repairs. So, in addition, a high level of maritime connectivity is essential to facilitate trade and make inventories management cheaper overall in an island, because if no, we are so far away. Therefore, the demand side can be increased by stimulating the arrival of ship connectivity that generate employment and business, so that this effect is spread from the demand side to the supply side. So from here to the demand side to supply side. The bunkering must be highlighted since the Canary Island, in particular the port of Las Palmas, is considered the Atlantic gas station. From this perspective, and with the idea of not losing this capacity, we have to lead projects capable to produce alternative fuels such as hydrogen or ammonia. A regasification plant has already been installed. Do not lose sight of the fact that this type of services increase the connectivity. Finally, naval repair are also a start service in the port of Las Palmas. Therefore, we also have to lead projects capable to maintain and improving these services, because in addition to stimulating other business, it also increased the connectivity. So, in short, the Port of Atlantic become entry point for commercial and engineering activity with high value. So, the Port of Las Palmas is curious, but we don't lose traffic with a crisis, with the pandemic. Why we don't lose traffic if we depend on the tourism and we don't have another tip of our demand reduced a lot. For this reason, I put here the demand side. So why we don't lose traffic? Because when you go inside, you say increase the traffic in 1%. Why is that possible? Because the local traffic reduced more than 10%, but the transshipment increased more than 10%. So at the end, the transshipment is, of course, is produce the connectivity. So for this reason, the port of Las Palmas is the fourth port in Spain in connectivity. If we see this indice, okay, I will finish. I don't understand why. No, I didn't answer them very well when we have the meeting. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lourdes. Okay, now moving on to Mr. Linas Vaskarides from DG Maritime Affairs and Fisheries. Linas, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
And you can see me as well, hopefully?
Yes,
Good.
I can, Linas.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you for inviting me to this panel and to do the presentation. So I will not have a PowerPoint presentation, which makes things quite easier, I would say. I'm the policy officer of Unit A2 in DG Mare. The unit is responsible for the blue economy sectors, maritime spatial planning, and aquaculture. And I'm the policy officer coordinator of the European Ports Forum subgroup, which is called Ports as Hubs for a Sustainable Blue Economy. We more commonly call it Blue Ports in our jargon in the Commission. And I am also responsible for the coastal and maritime tourism of the European Union. What might be interesting for the workshop here to mention as well is my previous experience in the European Commission, where I joined in 2004, where I worked as well for DG Move, so for the mobility and transport, particularly in the rail unit, and for the regional policy for the regional development. I mentioned them because there might be later on questions about these policies where I worked in the past. And finally, about my experience before joining the Commission, I used to work for the shipping business for many years in Cyprus and France, and so I am still fairly aware of the issues related to the shipping sector. Now, for the current topic, which is the trade in ports, here I mainly focus on my role as coordinator of the European Ports Forum subgroup, Ports as Hubs for a Sustainable Blue Economy. And the role of this forum is to integrate ports into the blue economy. This means that we try to develop the marine renewable energies, take care of the environment as much as we can, environmental issues. We could refer to the Port Reception Facilities Directive as an example for these environmental issues. Logistics, we take care of the circular economy, and we try to have a sustainable fishing. I mentioned here two things that are not really directed, are not really related directly with DG Mare, but we work closely with DG Move, and it's the responsibility of DG Move for these two particular sectors. It is the Port Reception Facilities Directive, which is a ports issue in DG Move, and the logistics. And now the main mission of this forum that we just created now in DG Marine about 6 months ago, and we try to see how we can integrate in the blue economy, is to see and define the new role and maybe as well the new infrastructure of the ports, which means, in fact, in a way to rethink the way the ports are built to better integrate them and connect them with the industry and the regions in the hinterland. This is the main objective, and within this, we have this forum that we created, as I said, in the first half of 2021, sorry. And we already put on the table many issues about this new role of the ports with the new needs of space and of connectivity. And this comes as well to what we're talking today about digitalization and the modern technologies about the development of the ports. So I will stop here for my presentation so I don't spend much time, and I'm available for any questions that will come either now or in the panel later.
Thank you, Linos, for that overview. That's excellent, and we look forward to getting into some of those issues further on in our panel discussion. Now, finally, we'll move back to Ireland, to the northwest of Ireland, which might not be as tropical or as hot as places like the Canary Islands, Rosita, but I believe the scenery is really good there. So we're delighted to have Ms. Rosita Mahoney, Senior Economic Development Officer at Donegal County Council, who will talk about connectivity in the northwest of Ireland. So thank you, Rosita.
No problem. Thank you, Adele. Can you see my slides there?
Not just yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Not yet.
No.
Savos, maybe I could have.
I can present the slides for you if you want.
Perfect, Savos. Thank you.
It's just strange because you share, but you don't appear. Yeah.
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 Okay. Should be coming up now. Thank you, Savos. Good morning to everyone, and I suppose thanks for the invite to speak at this morning's workshop. So my name's Rosita Mahoney. I work in economic development here in Donegal County Council, and I suppose our role involves working in collaboration with local and national partners, really to maximise sustainable job creation opportunities and also to drive economic growth. So this morning I'd look at our own port economies and their contribution to trade and growth. I'd also touch on the challenges presented to us here in Donegal by Brexit and the requirement for enabling infrastructure. Also, I'll discuss the opportunities for connectivity, really to support emerging industries, and also the contribution of our marine tourism to economic growth. And finally, I suppose really just to highlight the importance of port connectivity and collaboration, really to address and mitigate against those Brexit challenges that we're experiencing, but also I suppose for delivering balanced regional development and in supporting our emerging renewable energy opportunities. So on the slide there, it demonstrates Donegal County Council's commitment really under our county development plan. So the council recognises that immense environmental, social and economic value of our maritime and coastal resource and seeks to maximise its potential in a sustainable manner. So I suppose it goes without saying that we're committed to supporting and proactively facilitating the transition to a low carbon climate resilient society by 2015. So I suppose up in Donegal here, we're a coastal county in the northwest Atlantic seaboard. We've over 1,100 kilometres of a coastline, which is actually 17% of the state's total. We've a number of deep natural harbours, many coastal communities, and also a range of inhabited islands. So just the next slide there, Savas, please. In terms of our port economies as well, or their, I suppose, their economic footprint, our ports are primary drivers of rural economies and our coastal communities, where I suppose the tradition of fishing is deeply rooted in the social and cultural fabric of our communities in Donegal. But our ports act as an anchor around which supporting service sectors develop. So our seafood sector is significant. It accounts for about 15% of our coastal employment, which is, in national terms, twice the national average. So we could be considered very, very dependent on the marine sector of all counties in Ireland. As a council, we have a remit of 155 piers and harbours, which are shown on the map there in the slide. And those include Burton Port and Rathmullen, along with our premier port of Killybegs and Greencastle, which are two of our main ports. Just the next slide there, please, Savas. So just to touch on Killybegs as our key port. It's of regional and national significance, owing, I suppose, to its value to the fishing, marine engineering, and it's a wealth of knowledge, skills and experience exists there. So the seafood sector accounts for about 82% of economic activity, and there's a contribution of 94 million to the local economy, and it supports 1,000 plus direct jobs. So enhancing the port facilities at the harbour there has recently been investigated. So with the intention of upgrading the existing infrastructure to deliver, I suppose, more sustainable employment in the future development, but also to support the new and emerging industries and also marine tourism as well. Next slide there, Savas. Greencastle is the second of our larger ports, and it's located in close proximity to Northern Ireland. It makes a significant contribution again to the local economy of 26 million, again supporting 330 direct jobs there in the Inishowen Peninsula, and 46 million turnover in seafood activity as well. Just the next slide, please. So I suppose across many of our ports here in Donegal, a common characteristic is the significant distance from major urban settlements. So we know that physical connectivity is paramount for trade purposes. So a number of challenges here are in terms of connectivity. Our current enabling infrastructure is quite limited. In fact, we have no rail network here, no motorway, there's no gas pipeline or adequate electricity grid really to service, emerging technologies presented through offshore industries. So there is a need for enhanced, I suppose, multimodal transport network for Donegal, and key investments to be made really to allow us to remain competitive with that improved infrastructure for transport connectivity. I suppose going back to the theme of the workshop here, for trade, tourism, and also for economic growth. So Brexit presents unprecedented challenges, as we know, but here we are particularly exposed with direct implications for many of our rural and coastal fishing communities. So for that reason, ease of access to ports will become more important to increase the number of exports, for market diversification, And because of our proximity to Northern Ireland here and to export and ports there, we have over the years developed a very strong tradition of a focus, I suppose, on our exporting activity and that reliance on our UK trade links. So we are, I suppose, in essence, particularly vulnerable and exposed to the challenges presented by Brexit. Next slide, please. So we are ideally located on the northwest Atlantic seaboard, and as such we can take advantage of sources of renewable energy. We have a superb renewable energy resource, and that's natural strategic advantage for the likes of wind energy generation. So according to the Irish Wind Energy Report, there's considerable
Just
potential.
1 minute to finish, Rosita.
Thank you, Adele. For Killybegs as a strategic base for Ireland's growing renewable sector. Moreover, as I touched on, Greencastle has potential as an important gateway port, not only for the Northwest City region with our local authority partners in Derry and Strabane Council, but also in terms of the Northwest region of Ireland. So this would result in improving connectivity linkages between Ireland and other EU ports post-Brexit for trade, and I suppose more so offering an alternative for businesses in terms of exporting and importing goods, particularly to EU destinations. Next slide. So as a council, we're working with key stakeholders and organisations to maximise blue economy opportunities. So there's a number of examples there. Carol Boner from the LYIT would have spoken at a previous workshop in relation to the establishment of a blue economy marine cluster, and we're working with Enterprise Ireland, Killybegs Harbour User Group, and also the LYIT in relation to that. We can also play a lead role in research and innovation and partnering again with the LYIT, the Bryden Centre, and that's looking at the development of an Ocean Innovation Centre based in Killybegs. Obviously, through our working on the task forces representatives in the Atlantic area, and also through our involvement in the ASBAN project to support innovation capability within businesses across the county. We're also a participant on the Marine Institute's H-Wind project, and that's really to position green hydrogen as a means of providing energy. Next slide. This demonstrates the importance of the marine tourism as an engine for sustainable economic growth, and has made a significant contribution to our economy here in Donegal. In terms of ports, as tourism clusters, Killybegs has 25 cruise liner bookings secured for 2022 with an estimated value of 300 million to the local economy. So also we're featured under the Wild Atlantic Way and have a number of 37 discovery points and 3 signature points as well. So it just exemplifies the importance of marine tourism to the economic growth of our county. So the final slide. Thank you. So considering our peripherality here in Donegal, which is, I suppose, to an extent exacerbated by lack of physical access infrastructure, it can impact on our competitiveness. So that's why staying connected for trade, tourism and economic growth is very, very and vitally important for us. And really to address the challenges presented to Brexit to the fishing sector here in Donegal, to enable them to be continued viability and to support diversification. Furthermore, the importance of collaboration between regional ports we feel is paramount in providing a platform. For example, if there was a revision for 10T criteria, if that were to happen, we don't have a 10T designated port in Donegal or the Northwest region, and in light of the growing importance of Killybegs as a regional significant port, and also Greencastle to feature in that. So just I suppose finally, investment for balanced regional development is needed to sustain employment, but to provide an enabling infrastructure for those emerging industries in terms of offshore renewables, with the potential for significant future employment in key growth sectors. And I suppose the development of renewable energy is the final point there, to maximise our own local employment opportunities, you know, to allow us to have the ambition to compete internationally in the global renewable energy market. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosita. And look, it's really interesting to look at you know how Donegal and the connectivity in Donegal will be really important in mitigating future challenges linked to trade and to climate change as well, and the role of more peripheral regions as well in facilitating emerging industries like offshore renewable energy. I want to thank all of our panelists for those excellent overviews. We have some time left for discussion, just a short few minutes, but we'll try and get as much into that as possible as we can. Stavros had shared the Slido link for those from the audience that would like to submit questions. We won't get to all questions, unfortunately, but if there are questions that you would like to submit, we can certainly put them to our panelists either during the session or after the session if we don't get time to them. So just to move into a few questions, Frank, I just want to come back to you first there, you know, just on, you know, in terms of the Port of Waterford's role, and you made some really interesting points there, just in terms of the role of comprehensive ports and how do you think that might evolve? If you were to say in the next 5 years, how do you see I suppose, the role of the comprehensive port evolving, and what do you see as being the key enablers for that?
Thanks, Adele. Key enablers, that's a very big phrase. The role at the moment is, I mean, ports load and unload ships, and we do that in terms of our bulk business and our low business. We have flexibility and scope that we can readily handle project cargoes, break bulk cargoes, which really means steel and timber, and we can do that, you know, easily and well. Whereas in some of the more constrained, congested, you know, parts of our port sector, that's quite difficult. So that's really important, and we can continue to do that into the future. We see, you know, our rail freight offer expanding when there's a restart coming on. There's very little rail, you know, the rail freight, I think we feel is underutilized in Ireland for very justifiable reasons. But maybe its time is coming, and that's something we can do really well. We're very well connected with very good infrastructure for rail. We will do what we've done in the past in terms of onshore renewables. We will facilitate onshore building of wind turbines, I think, for a lot of the country. We're happy to do that, and we see ourselves facilitating offshore renewable work as well into the future. We don't see ourselves being a construction port, but I think we will play our role. It'll be a subsidiary role, and maybe the point there is, I think, we need to be really honest in what we can do, because there isn't much time to be for a lot of, you know, positioning and so we need to be very direct in what we see we can do. So we see ourselves playing a
and just to, I suppose, to zone in a little bit on that, Frank, how do you see, what's your view then on port clusters and cooperation? So cooperation between ports and the importance of it.
Yeah, I mean, for people looking in, I mean, Ireland is a small island, and the Republic is a small economy, which I think we just reached 5 million people. We're effectively clustered at ports in Ireland as we are. We all have to serve the economy, and we all do it in different sorts of ways, and we all play a different role. We're designed to compete commercially, Adele. I'm not sure how much of that commercial competition really dictates where freight and where work actually goes. There are other things that will define that first and foremost. But in the face of new challenges, which is, you know, very much the climate challenge and the offshore challenge, with limited time and limited resource, let's be honest, I think the pandemic has even exacerbated that. So with limited time and limited resource, we really need to optimize what we do, you know, and I think that means we got to cluster, we got to be honest, we have to cooperate. And there are really good examples of cooperation, you know, across Europe with our ports. A lot of support, interport support, and in Ireland we cooperate very well at, you know, at certain things. You're going to be talking about the cruise guys later on. You know, we have to represent Ireland, set Ireland as an island, and we cooperate amongst ourselves very well there. And there are other areas we do it as well. But I think the climate thing pushes us, I think, to go that step further, optimize the offer, be very clear what we're doing. We're short on time, short on money. We've got to get on with it.
Okay. Thanks, Frank. Lourdes, just to come to you. On, you know, you're coming from the perspective of the Canary Islands. How do you think that ports in the Canary Islands will evolve over the next couple of years? Do you see trade being a big focus or emerging sectors? Okay, do we have Lourdes? Okay, Rosita.
Okay, we are.
Oh, we have Lourdes there. Okay, great. Thank you, Lourdes.
Okay, thank you. We are 7 islands, no, well, now 8 islands, because a small island now it was a small island and now it's island, but it's the same. So, but for us it's very important the connectivity, of course, because if not, overall, because the connectivity have to side for one side don't generate for itself don't generate plenty of add value, but for another side is very important for the trade. If no, you are going to have the stock for a long time. It's too expensive overall for Canary Island, because our trade came all for outside. We don't have any production here. So, but it's fundamental in this sense. So we are our port is very active in this sense, and is in the middle of the Atlantic. For this reason, we are doing different projects. Overall, we are now doing something for the sustainability, the point of the sea of sustainability, and also the digitalization, because we have problem with logistic. But you know, there are plenty of time, because we are in the European Union, but we are considered like a third country. We are not plenty of the community. We are different type of tax, different type of regimen. So it's difficult, because the merchandise start perhaps in the port 3 days to 4 days, because there are one tax, another tax, different type. So it's difficult. But we have now a project about that, and I hope the things are going to be better, because we live from the tourism demand, and we have to give food to this person, and we need the port, of course. But I see, if you see now, the port is in the traffic, you lose plenty of traffic. We don't lose traffic. We increase 1%. How is that possible? Because we have this two type of traffic: local traffic, captive traffic, and transshipment. Transshipment is generate the connectivity, no the local traffic, no. But the local trade take advantage of the transshipment, no. In this sense, the local traffic decrease for more than 10%, but the transshipment increase in more than 10%. At the end, they are compensate. But it's not good, because it's not good in the sense the activity in the port is less, because the plenty of services around the local merchandise don't produce. So the firm or the company in the port say, oh, we don't have work, we have problems, and we need more. You know, it has been complicated, but we have hope. We are going to be better in the future.
Thank you, Lourdes. It's really interesting just to get that perspective, just, you know, given the location of the Canary Islands. And to move back to Donegal for a second, Rosita, can I just ask you, you mentioned about, you know, the role of ports in Donegal, such as Killybegs and Greencastle, playing a future role in connectivity. What do you think are the key enablers for that, Rosita?
I suppose really, I mean, to begin with, I mean, it goes back to our connectivity infrastructure, Adele, and, you know, access as well. And we have challenges in and around that, which is obviously causing an imbalance in regional development between us and the rest of the state. So I suppose the seaports play a key role actually as enablers of economic growth. Killybegs, along with Sligo and Galway, are classed as ports of regional significance, while I suppose for Greencastle it's an important regional gateway port, really, in improving linkages between Ireland and other EU ports, particularly, you know, post-Brexit, for exporting and importing goods, particularly from EU destinations. So I suppose one of the key enablers for us, Adele, is it's the lack of designation of 10 core ports or comprehensive ports in the region. and that's affecting, I suppose, our international connectivity. It's set against this on the backdrop, I suppose, of emerging technologies and our superb wind natural resource here, for renewables. Our economic competitiveness as well, as I say, and capitalising on those opportunities. So the fact that there isn't a TEN-T port designation is, I suppose, by that happening would be a key economic enabler for us, really,
Okay.
in terms of our own national climate action, decarbonisation and so forth as well. So I suppose that's a key enabler for us. Should any revision occur to the TEN-T criteria, and in recognition maybe for the potential for offshore renewables or significant renewable resource here, then that would be, I suppose, really a massive boost to coastal communities in Donegal.
Thank you, Rosita. Linus, I'm just going to, we're very short on time. I'm just going to close with a question for you, Linus, just on the whole area of digitalisation. So we've focused a lot on physical infrastructure and connectivity. In terms of the digital infrastructure that can improve connectivity and trade, what do you see as being the key issues there and the key enablers?
Okay, thank you, Edel. I will answer to the question, and maybe if I may have 1 minute more to give a reaction to other comments. So for the digitalization, of course, this is a key issue for the exchange of information and exchange of data. Knowing as well from my past experience, although the technology is there, although the data is there and is available, we often have problems of exchanging in time. This might not be the case in Ireland, but it's definitely the case in other countries where we see them sometimes not being fast enough, especially in the port. But maybe, as I said, this is not the case in Ireland. However, a bigger issue is that many big companies have their own system of, let's say, exchange of information between them and between the office and the ships. And these systems sometimes are not compatible between them and not compatible with the port authorities. It's not always the case, thank God, but sometimes this is the case, and this might create problems. And this is what we try to, let's say, face and to see how can we tackle this issue in the format we created. If I may have just 1 minute to comment on the two reactions before.
Yeah.
So for the role of ports, as Mr. Roland has said, it is very interesting the way he said. That's why I said maybe you don't have this problem in Ireland, but unfortunately not all the ports in Europe are functioning the same way, and some of them need the help of the authorities, I mean national authorities, regional authorities, and of the EU, and we try to help them. Last comment about what I heard from the Gran Canaria, very interesting, from Mrs. Lourdes Trujillo, is that Gran Canaria sometimes is considered as a third country. Well, this might be the case from the Spanish point of view. From the European point of view, this is not so much the case because there are many regions and many, let's say, islands that are far from the, let's say, the mainland. It's the case as well in Ireland, in Finland, and Portugal, and many other places. And although we have a special policy for the ultra-peripheric regions, as we call them in the EU, that is facing the particular problems of these regions, they are also seen as normal regions of the country with the appropriate measures or funding according to what their specific needs. So yes, it's a particular case, but maybe let's say the point of view of the third country is more a national problem between Spain and the Canary Islands, not really with the EU. So thank you. That were my comments.
Thank you, Linus. We'll be coming back to you, Linus, in the second panel for just some comments from a tourism point of view, and also to Danny. So Danny, I'm not going to dwell on any further questions now with you because unfortunately we are up on time. But I just really want to thank all of our panelists for those really insightful overviews and discussion. And I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning. We are delighted that you could participate, and I would welcome you to join us for the second session as well, as we have another really interesting session starting at 12 o'clock on the whole area of tourism, 12 o'clock, actually, I better get this right. It's 11 o'clock Irish Standard Time and 12 o'clock European Standard Time. So just in case of any confusion. So in 10 minutes, wherever you are located, in 10 minutes, we will start the tourism panel, and I look forward to welcoming our audience back for that. So thank you, everybody, and we will see you in 10 minutes. So you can
we
grab
stay
a cup
here
of tea or coffee.
on this platform?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
that's perfect. Thank you, Linas.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Can all panelists for panel 2 hear me?
Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you, Del.
That's great. Thank you.
Are you?
How are we all? We all set?
Good.
That's good. So Danny is going to just give just before you come in, Michael, Danny is just going to give a brief overview on the just the passenger flows. So just so you're aware of that, so you just won't be called straight away. So we'll just ask Danny to give that overview, and then we'll come straight into you, Michael. Is that okay?
Fine. And you have the slides, so he can change the slides there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So we'll try and stick to the 5 minutes.
I just sorry to interrupt, just for sake of good order. I thought I was going to do my slides myself.
You can, yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I just confusion. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a problem. Yeah, it's up to you if you want to share them yourself. That's no problem at all.
I couldn't see that happen. It was 18 megabytes or something that I sent you yesterday. So that's why I sent you a PDF. It might be just easier for me to share.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you, Connor. And just so you're aware, Linus will be, he's already given an overview at the first panel. So Linus will be joining us for questions on your panel. So we'll have 5 speakers, including Danny. And I will give you notice when you have a minute left. So if you can try and wrap up then within a minute, and then we'll move into the panel discussion. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
And Liam is going to just open the session, just welcome everybody back, and then we will move on. All right?
Thank you very much.
Thanks a million.
Good morning, Connor. How are you?
Hey, Liam. How are you?
Good, thank you. We're covering all ports, Connor. In the last session, we were dealing with ports from the far northwest in Killybegs, all the way down to the Canary Islands, off the coast of Africa. So,
I know Killybegs well, but I know the harbour bar in Killybegs anyway.
Yeah, and now we have, of course, we have Cork, which is the centre of the shipping world.
Ireland's premier port.
Very good.
All right, Mick.
No comment. I'm representing 145 ports here this morning. Liam, okay.
Good morning, Michael. How are you?
Good, very good.
It was a good session this morning, Liam. I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, interesting. You'll be pleased to know that the weather in the capital is fine, sunny, 18 degrees.
Depends which capital would that be?
There you go. Sabas, I think we're on time, so we can get started if everybody's ready.
Yep.
Welcome back, everybody, to our second panel discussion after a very interesting and insightful opening discussion on trade and connectivity, and some terrific perspectives and points of view expressed by the diverse panelists that we had on that discussion, including, and somewhat humorously, a contribution from the dog on the Canary Islands. So they say in the movies that you should never work with children or animals, and that's just one of the joys, I suppose, of a live production, that you can't always. So I apologize for the background noise. And a little known fact, so if you remember it going forward, that the Canary Islands are not actually named after the birds. It's from the Latin word for dog. So maybe it's not surprising that we would have had an intervention from the dog on the Canary Islands. As we head into the next panel discussion now, we're going to turn our attention to tourism and look at connectivity from a tourism point of view, both in the context of intra-European tourism, but also in the context of tourism coming from outside of the EU and aspects of cruise tourism. So you're back in the capable hands of Adele O'Connor. Adele, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Liam. Welcome everybody to our second panel, which is going to focus now on tourism, as Liam mentioned. We're delighted to have an excellent panel of speakers here this morning to give you a perspective on tourism from a ports and connectivity point of view. So we'll have a big focus on cruise this morning, as well as looking at the smaller vessels sector. And the panel this morning consists of Daniel Fallon Bailey, who is the Economic Advisor and Policy Specialist at the INDO. And Daniel will give you an overview, I think, of the impact that particularly COVID-19 has had on passenger flows. And obviously this has a huge economic impact on tourism and the contribution of tourism to economic growth in Atlantic member states. Then we have Mr. Michael McCarthy, who is the chairman of Cruise Europe. So we're delighted to have Michael's perspective on the cruise industry in Europe, and what are the key issues for the cruise industry moving forward, particularly given all the challenges that it has faced over the last 18 months, in particular with COVID. Then we have Professor Luis Silveira from the Geography and Tourism Department in University of Cumbria, and Luis has focused a lot of his research on looking at the nautical tourism, and will give us also a perspective from new trends, particularly around that in relation to smaller vessels and cruise. Then we move on to Professor Juan Luis Eugenio Martin from the University of Las Palmas in the Gran Canaries, who has some really interesting insights in relation to the economic impact of cruise from outbound and an inbound perspective to countries. So that's a really interesting take on things, looking at outbound economics on that. And then we have Mr. Conor Moles, who is the Chief Commercial Officer at the Port of Cork. So the Port of Cork is one of Ireland's Tier 1 10T ports, and the Port of Cork is operating across all the modalities, including cruise, and has big ambitions around cruise. And Conor is also the chairperson of Cruise Ireland. And finally, we have Mr. Linus Voskarides from DG Maritime Affairs and Fisheries, who will be able to give us a perspective from the European Commission. So welcome to all our panelists, and we will kick off now with Danny, who's going to give us an overview on some of the economics around the passenger numbers over the last number of months. So welcome back, Danny.
Thanks, Adele. And I'll just throw it up here.
Great.
Can you see that okay?
Danny. Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
So as Adele mentioned, I'm just going to give a very brief overview of the Irish passenger market. And unfortunately, there's no easy way to look at what has happened over the last number of months since March 2020 with Irish passenger numbers. What we're seeing here is the blue line across the top is a benchmark in 2019. This is an average weekly volume that would have been normal in 2019 and in previous years before that. And the green line there is the volume of GB passengers, so passengers that travel between Irish and ports in the United Kingdom. And the smaller blue line there at the bottom is the volume of passengers that travel between Ireland and EU ports in France and Spain. So if we start from here, you know, in early January 2020, we can see towards the end of March just the precipitous drop off in passenger numbers for obvious reasons. And in terms of a recovery, you know, even though there was some reopening of the Irish economy over the summer of 2020, the volumes of weekly passenger numbers in Ireland never got near what would have been normal in 2019, which would have been approximately 80,000 per week. So volumes of passenger numbers in Ireland didn't surpass 30,000 per week until July of this year. And this is not a coincidence that this coincided with the introduction of the EU's digital travel cert. So almost to the week, we can see that with the introduction of that, things have changed from that point onwards. Although we are still considerably below 2019 levels for a standard July and August, it is the best performance since March of 2020. So again, we can see with some reopenings around Christmas time, volumes of passenger numbers trended towards what would have been seen pre-COVID levels, if we refer to that. Again, another severe lockdown after that. So when you total all the combined loss over the last 18 months, we really get to see there's some stark numbers here. And for the first 6 months of 2021, for example, it's over 800,000 fewer passengers than the first 6 months of 2019. In Northern Ireland, there's been far fewer declines or not as steep, and that is because of the intra-UK trade. And once the restrictions on intra-UK travel were lifted, there's much more frequent travel within the European Union, and that has contributed to less to shallower declines in Northern Irish travel. And so overall, we can see that the declines in passenger numbers have been evenly spread amongst all of the Irish ports. No Irish port has really fared considerably worse than others in terms of the volume. They've all been facing the same restrictions in terms of travel to the United Kingdom and travel to Great Britain. Travel to Great Britain was one that has been very common. It's not always involved with tourism, and there would be a lot of friends and family links between Ireland and Great Britain, and travel between the two countries will always be at a certain level. And that's why we did see a number of tourist travel or travel passengers even at the worst period of the pandemic, and it was the first to recover once society began to reopen. And Ireland GB travel is always going to be common and in this part of the world. But the key point to take away from here is that there's a pre-COVID volume that would have been consistent for the latter half of the decade, and that is not currently being reached over the last number of months, and it's still a way off it. And although the EU digital travel cert has led to a significant change in volumes, we are still far off that 2019 volume. And this is just an overview here of what I've mentioned. So our volumes per week didn't surpass 30,000 per week until July of 2020. A typical spring and summer would have had 80,000 a week. And just to finish on the point that the consistently low passenger volumes expose the RoPax model, which is an essential part of the Irish maritime industry, and it exposes that model to long-term vulnerability, as well as being detrimental to the domestic tourism market. So although there has been significant resilience in the Irish maritime sector in going to freight only and to focusing on freight while passengers numbers were still restricted, I am sure that for all the operators involved in the RoPax industry, they are still looking very much forward to return to passengers back to pre-COVID levels. And we're not currently there yet. The EU digital COVID certificate was a significant change, but we are still off pre-existing numbers and still dealing with, and I'm sure that the operators are still dealing with the accumulated loss over the last 18 months. So just to finish here, Adele, that's the reality of what we've seen over the last 18 months. And I'll hand over to the speakers who are involved in that industry now.
Thank you, Danny. Yeah, some, I suppose, really stark figures there when we look at the impact on passenger volumes over the last number of months, and these are, you know, from an Irish perspective as well, but I imagine that we would see a lot of similar trends, you know, in the Atlantic area. So I guess a number of challenges for the industry as we move on, and that's something that hopefully we can discuss more in the panel. So I'd like to invite Mr. Michael McCarthy, the chairman of Cruise Europe. Michael, hello. Can you hear me, Michael?
Clear, yeah.
Great. Brilliant. Yes, that's great, Michael. We can see you. Savas, can you share Michael's slides, please?
Well, good morning, everybody. I've put quite a lot of information on these slides. I don't intend, obviously, to read it through, but you know, it will be available for you afterwards. So, what is Cruise Europe? Cruise Europe consists of 145 members in 4 regions. We have the UK, Ireland, we have the Atlantic Europe from Hamburg down to Lisbon, the Baltic, Norway, Iceland, Faroes. I've been chair since 2012, and the Irish members are Cork, Belfast, Galway, Shannon Foynes, and we have associate members Excursions Ireland and Hamilton Ship Agents. So what is the mission of Cruise Europe? Cruise Europe's mission is to connect ports and the cruise executives to promote cruising in Northern Europe. Because if the ships aren't in Northern Europe, they're not going to be in Ireland. So the COVID-19 pandemic has forced us and a change in communication and how we transfer information. So we're very reliant for the last 18 months on webinars with the cruise lines, with the Cruise Line Industry Association, ESPO, IAPH, and through various EU projects. Very much focused on social media, newsletters, surveys, interviews, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, etc. So what are the current top issues? We've been heavily involved in the return to cruising protocols and procedures, with working with the cruise lines on new itineraries, sustainability, both environmental and social, and port infrastructure. Next slide, please. So what are the issues in relation to the last 18 months? Irish ports were closed by the government to cruise ships until 2022. The UK and the rest of the countries are there. The UK led the charge, as well as Germany, in a return to cruising. And all of Europe now is open, other than Ireland, to the cruise industry. Next slide. So the rapidly changing situation then in Ireland is, we've had that. Next slide, Travis, please. Yeah. So from an economic point of view, there have been many surveys carried out, and I know that Conor is going to cover it in an Irish context, but in the European context, and pulling together the various surveys that have been done on the spend and the economic benefit of the cruise industry. And if we look at various spends, this is an average, and of course when we look at averages, it can be changed. But primarily from Spanish, French, right into Norway and right into the Baltic. The figures that I have there on the screen generally illustrate the impact of the cruise industry. So if you have a turnaround port and a passenger coming in, staying in a hotel, the average spend again is almost €200. Transit calls throughout Europe averaging around 70 per passenger. Some regions are higher, some are less. The spend is spread right across everything from fashion, local crafts, food, beverage, retail. Biggest spenders, Americans, Canadians, Australian, British, and on down that order. And we carried out research and looked at what would the total revenue to a region from 100 cruise calls, and with an average of 200,000 passengers. And between direct and indirect spend, it was in the average of about 16.5 million to the region. Cruise ships want to come back to Ireland, and the reasons there are why they want to come back, with everything from culture, ancestry, specific tourist attractions, etc. Next slide, please, Travis. So what are the opportunities for Ireland? There's a latent demand for international tourism. We know that. The cruise lines' highest responsibility is always the health, safety and well-being of their guests. They continue to work with industry and partners throughout the world to get their cruise ships back up and running. And their absolute priority is, and it has to be, that they have to be above compliance to the best international public health measures. There's no compromise on that. We've seen examples of that last year when we saw passengers closeted on ships, couldn't get off the ships, ports not allowing the ships in America and Japan, and it was absolutely a catastrophic, PR debacle in relation to the cruise lines. Looking forward, in relation to Ireland, 2021, obviously, no cruise ships have been here. 2022, we're expecting vessels to bounce back from spring onwards. 2023, it's anticipated that there will be a full resumption in Ireland.
1 minute to finish.
Okay, and full cruise ships will sail again. So the sustainability, the last two slides I have on the next one, are post-pandemic, and sustainability are the issues that we can discuss, I'm sure, with questions. But sustainability also includes the social and the economic pillar, along obviously with the environmental issues. All the environmental issues are outlined on that slide, and with the cruise industry is a driver of innovation in relation to fuel, exhaust gas cleaning, onshore power, adapting ships for the future, aligning with United Nations Sustainability Development Goals out to 2030, and the cruise industry's aim is to be net carbon neutral by 2050. And the last slide. So, as I said previously, the cruise industry has no option but to be above compliant with all international regulations. It's carrying people, and every person has their own mobile phone. So I suppose the position in relation to government and particularly in Ireland, the ports have primarily been left with the task of promoting cruise. It's not part of government policy. It should be part of their policy, because every cruise tourist that comes into a region, 20 to 30% will come back on land holidays. So if you look at the cruise industry with a port coming in and 4,000 or 5,000 people, it's an opportunity for a port, it's an opportunity for a region as a billboard for those people to come back on a land holiday. So that's kind of what the cruise industry is in a nutshell. And we've seen that tourism in the tourism bodies, including Falls Ireland and etc., they spend millions advertising Ireland to the wider world, and yet we've got cruise ships coming in with captive people into our regions, and the government are blind to that sector completely. So that's my opening.
Thank you, Michael. Some really interesting points there that you raise, and I think the importance of the cruise sector to regional, development and regional economic growth can't be underestimated. And that figure that you gave there, 16.5 million, 100 cruise calls. Port Cork, for example, is going over those figures. And for that industry to be damaged, it has huge implications for a region, and also for future growth in the region around tourism, as you mentioned there, the cruise sector providing an opportunity for a region almost to billboard itself. So lots of interesting things there around sustainability as well. So Thank you for that, Michael, and I look forward to discussing that more with you in the panel discussion. Moving on now to Professor Luis Silveira from the Geography and Tourism Department at University of Canberra. Luis, good morning.
Hello, good morning.
Or good afternoon, I should say, is it in Portugal?
No, we have the same Irish
Oh,
time.
you're same time. Yes, that's right. Okay. Luis, yes, looking forward to your presentation. So ready
Yes,
when you are.
Just start sharing. Okay, so good morning to all. Today I'm bringing, because I think it's probably important, the point of view from tourism, but related to yachting and the seaports, because, for example, here in Portugal, some port administrations, they have the management of the marinas and the commercial ports. And so I'm bringing a case study related with the west coast of Portugal. And we can see here in this map with the general marine traffic that, of course, the west coast of Europe, it's a very important part of the world where we are getting a large flow from marine traffic. And if we see the traffic of yachts, we can see that Europe has an important role, and especially Portugal, because we are receiving, or from the west coast are departing yachts to the Mediterranean, coming from the north of Europe or Central and Northern Europe, and for those who are going to the Caribbean. So when we see the west coast of Portugal, and we can see through this red circle, we have the Marina of Figueira da Foz, or the city of Figueira da Foz, that has the seaport as well. And at the national scale, this marina and seaport, they are very far from other options, and with a large number of yachts and cruises passing by the coast, they are not stopping. And I can say, after the research that I was doing when I did a PhD, that there's a lack communication between all the stakeholders. You can see in this the photo with the red and the blue circles that we are talking about the marina and the port. Despite Figueira da Foz, it's included in a very important region of Portugal, a very touristic region with different tourism products as nautical, cultural, nature tourism, even religious tourism, with the city of Fatima that it's near from Figueira da Foz, and of course the gastronomy and wine tourism. The truth is that the yachtsmen, they just stop by to refuel the boat and then they leave. And the same thing happens with the commercial port. There is in the past the experience of receiving small, medium cruises, but it never started happening in a frequent with frequency. So at the same time, we can see that with the tourism, the tourists, they are always evolving. And then we can see that, of course, it still has a large part of the population who wants to travel. They really want to try to go in a large floating resort, like a large cruiser. And I think these numbers will keep growing up. But at the same time, a new market, it's arriving. We could say that it's the market for the medium or smaller cruises. At the same time, this is an opportunity for smaller ports, and we have the experience from the Azores Islands, where not all islands have the dimension in their ports to receive these boats. At the same time, that is good, because if we are talking about an island with, for example, 8,000 people, if you want to speak in a social sustainability point of view, these people, they don't want to receive this type of boats, but they are very open to receive cruises, but maybe smaller cruises. And the people who are traveling in the smaller cruises are different, because they are more experienced, they have their special needs, they are more environmental aware, and at the same time they are concerned about the climate change, and the cruising can have many problems related to pollution, but at the same time things are getting better, and we can't forget that new generations are start being the consumers. I mean, like the millennials, the new generation Z, and these people are very concerned about climate change. They want more experiences, sustainable experiences. They want to look for authenticity, and probably this can be a solution. I mean, I think the big topic here is the seaports. They could, and it's important to make bridges between the destinations and the operators, because as in the case of Figueira da Foz, there's no communication between the administration and the operators and with the stakeholders that works in tourism in that city. And I mean, this is happening in many countries, and it could be a very important issue to be evaluated. I'm very open to receive your questions. This is more or less the idea that I would like to bring. Adele?
Great, thank you, Lewis. Thank you for that overview, and looking forward to discussing that further in the panel. Interesting point there, just looking at the new consumers and who they will be and what their demands will be in the future. So we move on to Professor Juan Luis Eugenio from the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canarias. Juan, are you with us there?
Yes.
Great.
Yes. I've got share. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, can you see this?
Yes, I can see that perfectly. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, my name is Juan Luis. I'm head of the research group in the economy of infrastructure, transport, and tourism at the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. Well, what do we do? Basically, we are economists, and we try to understand different sectors like infrastructure, like sectors like transport, like tourism. And we employ for that different methodologies such as cost-benefit analysis, competitive general equilibrium, econometrics, economic policy analysis, spatial analysis, sustainability, or time series forecasting, for instance. Just to give you an overview of the kind of projects that we are involved in, we are currently working in the Sea Bridge project. This is linking cost-benefit analysis and competitive general equilibrium, and the purpose is to try to provide a combination between micro and macro issues, because both of them are really, really important. As Lourdes said before, we are also very involved in the maritime port relationship, in trade sense, in tourism sense as well, and in digitalization. We have been working on the implication of the digital era in tourism, the effects of Airbnb, for instance, the collapse of Thomas Cook, the evolving of Ryanair, and the crowding out effects that they might have happened. Yeah. And also, just to finish up with the current key projects, we are working with the Inter-American Development Bank, and we are working on real-time demand, tourism demand in 19 countries all over Latin America and Caribbean. And the idea is to have a model that can understand three things at the same time, basically the income effect, the confidence effect, and the pandemics. So all these three together are providing us information to understand what is expected that will happen in the next month for 10 origins for each of these 19 countries. And we have launched this in the website, in the IDB, and to relate our current research with the topics that we are discussing today. We have worked also in different projects. For instance, one in Uruguay, and this, I think that can summarize well what we are doing. Basically, you can see here our purpose is to take into account demand, and we take into account origin markets, because obviously they are different kinds of products, different regions, destination regions, and all this together provide us figures on daily expenditure, length of stay, and arrivals. Once we understand demand at the micro level, we can get the expenditure at the macro level. Once we get the expenditure at the macro level, we can understand the economic impact in terms of GDP and employment. But the great of this methodology is that we are talking locally. It's a local GDP, local employment, and we provided this kind of output to the bank to assess, for instance, to make the river between Argentina and Uruguay to allow large ships to go in. Yeah. And another example that I think it's also interesting for this discussion is when we look at Barbados. Barbados was interested, here you can see in the picture, this is Bridgetown, and they wanted to enlarge the port. And they wanted to get some funding from the Inter-American Development Bank. And the IDB wanted to make a survey, and they wanted to see the expenditure of this kind of tourists. And what we got was the figure on the left-hand side. It was basically cruise tourists spending not much as compared to stay-over tourists. And the lesson that we have to learn here, if we are looking at the whole area, the Atlantic as a whole, is that we cannot just look at figures like this, where this is the expenditure at the destination. I think that we need to look at the whole picture. We need to look at the expenditure that is left in the origin country. So if we are looking at tourists moving from Spain to Ireland, for example, we cannot just look at the expenditure in Ireland, but also the expenditure in Spain, and vice versa. So on the right-hand side, what we can see is the total expenditure per tourist, comparing ferries, yachting, air, and cruise. And what we can see here clearly is that cruise tourists spend much more than any other kind of tourist, especially air tourists. So by the time when we are assessing the economic impacts, if we are considering fundings from European Union, and we are looking at Ireland, Spain relationship in that sense, we need to consider both, not only the inbound perspective, but also the outbound perspective. Concerning connectivity, I think that it is also interesting in tourism to take into account multimodal connectivity, not only maritime connectivity, but also air connectivity, because this is crucial for the success of the tourism industry in a remote place such as the Canary Islands, for instance. Also, we cannot forget the transport connectivity between the port and the hinterland, for instance. Yeah. Concerning multimodal connectivity, I've got another example, also working with the Inter-American Development Bank. They were interested
1 minute to finish, please.
Thank you. They were interested in looking at air support and to promote air traffic between Brazil and Barbados. And what was surprising was that only 42% of such traffic that was generated, it was a new route, stayed on the island. The rest went to other Caribbean islands, or they got a cruise. And this is a good example of how multimodal connectivity can really help cruise, because otherwise Brazilians couldn't go that easy there. No? As compared to Americans already flying, for instance, American Airlines, 83% are staying in Barbados. Concerning COVID, just very quickly, what we can see, this is Spanish data, Google Trends, what we can see here is that cruise tourism hasn't recovered at all, still far from air recovery. It was the relationship between air and cruise in Google Trends was 4.34 in favor of air, and now it is 6.81. But this is heterogeneous. If you look at Ireland, the relationship is not that bad. It's pretty much stable between air and cruise. And if we compare ferry, cruise, and yachting, what we can get is that yachting has grown, actually has grown, has reached the peak before the financial crisis in 2008, whereas the ferries has catch up pretty much before COVID-19, and cruises are getting there. And this is in terms of interest. And digitalization, just to finish up, it's a matter of unbundling. We have seen this in tour operators. Tour operators have changed completely the industry like 20, 30 years ago, but now this is over. Most of the tourists are interested in getting tailor-made trips, and they are moving from the traditional package tours to unbundled services. And here, the cruises can also get part of it. They can try to move forward, and probably, I don't know, it depends on each port, but they can also get an opportunity here to unbundle also the itineraries and to improve the connectivity among different cruise lines or among different airports to get more flexibility, to provide more flexibility to the tourists. And that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan Luis. Thank you for that really insightful overview and looking at expenditure at the macro level. And when we look at funding, how we need to look at the inbound and outbound perspective. The future role of digitalisation, I think, as well, is a really important point in looking at these unbundled services and how that can play a role in, I suppose, the future involvement of the industry. So thank you for that. Now moving back to Ireland, we have Mr. Conor Moles, the Chief Commercial Officer of the Port of Cork and also the Chairperson of Cruise Ireland. Conor.
Adele, how are you? Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I'm just going to share my my PowerPoint that will help support my first 5 minutes here. Okay, I hope everyone can see.
Yeah, that's perfect, Conor. Thank you. We can see that.
So today, as I had mentioned, I'll wear two hats, primarily as the Chief Commercial Officer of the Port of Cork, but also as the serving chairperson of Cruise Ireland. And what I'd like to achieve in this 5 minute slot is really to talk about what really cruise tourism is and what it's brought to the Irish tourist industry, and then to focus a little bit on what it's brought in particular to the Port of Cork and the southern region, to help articulate maybe in more detail its positive impact. Earlier on, I think Michael did mention the concept of cruise tourism. And I might just go over that again for the audience, because it's hugely important when it comes to how cruise is treated, certainly, or how it's treated or how it's viewed in Ireland. And it's something that we need to attend to. So cruise tourism is a means of delivering people to the country for a short period of time, 10 to 12 hours generally. It means that those visitors, those tourists, get a taste, a feel, an experience, a high quality experience in a very short period of time, and it leaves them with an appetite to come back. Now, I labour this point because one of the problems that we face, particularly in Ireland, is cruise is not viewed in the same way as other tourist activities because of the absence of bed nights. And that is a huge problem for us, because that current view, which we need to work on, means that we are not a priority, or haven't been a priority, when it comes to tourism funding. And that really manifested itself in the wake of the damaging impact of COVID. So certainly when Ireland put in place a very active and progressive tourism recovery team at governmental level, while we as the cruise industry engage with them, we weren't up in the priority areas. Understandably in some ways, but I think really for us as an industry, we need to work closer with the tourism authorities, both Tourism Ireland and indeed Bord Fáilte, and to impress upon them how impactful cruise is, irrespective of the fact that bed nights are not there. And bed nights should not be the primary decider of what's important when it comes to cruise. And maybe just to articulate the impact and growth at a national level. And when I say national, maybe qualify that, because cruise in Ireland is not just the Republic of Ireland, it's an all island activity. And so the Belfast Harbour Commissioners in particular work very closely under the Cruise Ireland umbrella with the other ports. And it's a hugely successful approach as we promote Ireland as a destination of choice for cruise passengers. So over the last 10 years in particular, we've seen massive growth. Pre-COVID, we had over 300 vessels visiting the island of Ireland. And that's just under 500,000 passengers. Now, when we look at the economic contribution, the estimated contribution of that segment alone, never mind the return holidays, you're talking about 60 million. And that's a significant contribution in terms of the activity itself around the island. I'd like to maybe move now, and I am conscious of the 5-minute slot. I might just focus a little bit on the cruise tourism in the south of the country, which is primarily driven by the Port of Cork. It's our dedicated cruise berth in Cove in particular, and indeed the Port of Bantry. And again, to help articulate the point, we might just look at some statistics. So we look at the period of 1991 through to just pre-COVID in 2019. We had huge growth in both passenger and crew level. In terms of passengers, we went from just under 10,000 to 180,000 passengers and 63,000 crew in addition to that. I mentioned the crew because the crew are as important in many ways as the passengers in terms of spend. And to articulate that point, the average spend of a passenger is just over 80 euros, and the average spend of a crew person in the local economy is just under 30 euros. And in the Cork region alone, you're talking about 17 million. So this is hugely important, and we've seen the positive impacts of cruise in the complete revitalisation of ports and port towns like Cove, which has transformed over the last 10 years into a hugely vibrant town at the moment. And that was really the significant over the cliff impact, negative impact of COVID was seen hugely in COVID, particularly in the business community. And that COVID piece, which has affected us all, has affected the Port of Cork in particular, particularly badly. We have a very diverse business model. Cruise is a hugely important component part of that. And to lose that literally overnight was significantly damaging. So we had grown our business right up to nearly 100 vessels booked pre-COVID. And in the COVID year, we had 2 vessel calls. And as I think that Michael has drew attention to, no calls this year because currently cruise vessels are banned from Southern Irish waters. But we have seen return of cruise vessels in the north of the island. And
1 minute to finish.
Seen up to 70 vessels will call to the Port of Belfast in this year. So just to close off, what do we need to do to bring to see a safe return? Well, we in the port and in the other ports in Cruise Ireland, we are working closely with the department and the authorities on robust return to cruise protocols in support of hopefully a return of cruise in 2022. A united approach is hugely important. Cruise is not about just the port dealing with the cruise lines. Cruise is about the local authorities, the local business communities, as well as the ports, working together to bring cruise activities back to the ports. Hugely important post-COVID will be imbuing the local receiving communities with confidence that the returning cruise vessels, which will disgorge many thousands of passengers and crew, that it's done in a safe manner. And that confidence in that community cannot be underestimated. And then, most importantly, we are going to have to go back out internationally and promote Ireland as a destination for cruise. And that's going to be a huge challenge, particularly as we have seen cruise embraced this year in other jurisdictions and not in Ireland. So we have a bit of a challenge ahead of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Conor. Really interesting figures there that you mentioned, just looking at, the economic contribution of over 300 ships visiting the island of Ireland pre-COVID. You're talking about 60 million. And, I suppose the growth of cruise tourism in Ireland from 1991 to 2019, 180,000 passengers and 63,000 crew. So that's a very significant number of people coming on land there, and just with the spend numbers that you mentioned, it's a significant contribution to local and regional economies. So I think if we just move into the panel discussion and look at this a little bit closer. And I know, Linas, you have kindly joined us for the second panel, just to give a European perspective, a perspective from the European Commission. And I know, Linas, that you're not directly involved in cruise, but is there any comments you would like to make on some of the points from our panelists, just from the perspective of the European Commission?
Yes, thank you, Edel. As you correctly said, I'm not anymore responsible for that because of a technical transfer in the Commission. I started the file, but now another colleague is doing quite well, by the way, but it's not my responsibility anymore. I will simply say 2 things. The first one is that we are trying to coordinate the tourism activity of the cruises on the European level with the so-called cruise dialogue. And right now, my colleague who is dealing with that, called Heino Now, I can give you the details if you want later, he's preparing an event that will take place in 2022, if I'm not wrong. I think it's 2022, which will establish or launch a charter of good practices for cruise tourism, for a sustainable cruise tourism. I think this is the title. And this will be the result of a pan-European cruise dialogue, which, by the way, my predecessor started in 2015. Then I did one regional cruise dialogue, which was for the Atlantic in 2018. And now this is a cycle that is going to close with the second pan-European dialogue that will then result to the Charter of Good Practice for Tourism. So for this, more details you can have from my colleague who is dealing with it now. From my point of view as policy officer responsible for coastal and maritime tourism, I will simply say the main role of what I'm trying to do as a policy on a European level is to create more growth and jobs in the coastal and maritime tourism by reducing the seasonality of the tourism product. Of course, in countries like Ireland, where you do not really have the sun and the sea as we have it in the Mediterranean, this is a less problematic. It's not a big issue because your activities over the years, but the main reason for that is exactly to diversify the product in order to have it all the year around. So for the northern countries, it's easier because you are not, let's say, prisoners of the nice weather of the Mediterranean. So you have it all year around with either touristic activities or culinary activities or whatever else that you mentioned in the statistics before. But it's something that we try to exchange. And the most important part, and I will finish with that, what I am trying to do is to exchange experiences, knowledge, and practices that either from the northern countries can help the south, as I just mentioned, with different products that are not depending on the weather, or even sometimes from the south to take experience and go bring to the north on the infrastructures, because I have seen in many cases, even on a personal level, that in Northern European countries, or even in Ireland, and even in the UK, if I may add this in the list, you do not find so much infrastructure for tourism on the coast. It's very basic, not even, sometimes even inexistent. And for us, coming from the south, this is quite strange, because when you have good weather, there is no way to take advantage of it. So these were my comments, and if there are certain particular questions, except for the cruise tourism, because I told you what I could. However, I can relay any question to my colleague who is dealing with that now. I am available for that.
Thank you, Linus. I really appreciate that, and our panelists will really appreciate that, and I'm sure there will be some questions, and thank you for that insight. Michael, can I just move back to you? As chairperson of Cruise Europe, I suppose the cruise industry has been so heavily affected by COVID, and, you know, and Linus mentioned, you know, infrastructure there from a general tourism perspective, but you know, where do you see the cruise industry moving now? What do you think the key steps are? You know, where do you see the industry in a number of years' time, and what are the key enablers now? So we've seen issues with regards to maybe an underestimation of the, you know, economic impact of cruise tourism. So how can that be better communicated, and how do you think the industry can evolve over the coming years? Oh, sorry, Michael, I think you're on mute.
There's been about 20 questions in that, Adele.
Yeah, sorry. I said I'd throw them all at you.
Okay. Just before I answer that quickly, I'd just like to mention, I'd like, first of all, to respond to Linus in that Cruise Europe was heavily involved in 2015, 2017 in that cruise dialogue with ESPO. And we actually, there is a published document called the Charter of Good Practice, and under the Pan-European dialogue, and that highlighted the importance of the cruise industry on peripherality. In other words, if you look at the Norwegian coast or the west coast of Ireland and west coast of Scotland, that's not on a lot of kind of heavy tourism traffic. The cruise industry is a way of bringing people to those regions, and I think the EU recognized that. And if you take our own cruise, if you look at our whole wide Atlantic way, and you know, that's an example of what could be done. But if you could cruise the Wild Atlantic Way, and that would be the same up off Norway, and we're looking forward to working with the EU on that. In relation to infrastructure, you did mention the Med. I think this year it's been highlighted very negatively on Ireland because of people staycationing, with the lack of facilities in Irish ports for boating, yachting, swimming, you name it. And I think it's a wake-up call for the government that they have to invest in marine infrastructure. And the other thing then, and then I'll answer your question, is Luis Silveira made a very valid point about the size of cruise ships and not all ports having the infrastructure to take large cruise ships. And he gave an example. There are many examples in Cruise Europe in Norway where you have in the fjords maybe 800 people, and yet a cruise ship coming in with 3,000 or 5,000 people. So these are issues that are all being addressed, and Cruise Europe working with the cruise lines in, if you like, horses for courses. In other words, what cruise ships are relevant in what areas. So that's an ongoing process that we have. Okay, in relation to infrastructure and in relation to where the cruise industry is going, I think the ports now, and you know, the pandemic doesn't help. In other words, a lot of port executives see the cruise industry as nice to have rather than must have. And what I mean by that, I mean, Cork is very well equipped, Belfast is well equipped with docking facilities, Waterford has its facilities, but a lot of ports, are executives going to invest in cruise infrastructure when, if you like, there's no guarantee of a return? You'll invest in container terminals, bulk terminals, because you can see a 20, 30-year plan. So it's up to Cruise Europe and the cruise lines to convince government, convince the EU, and convince the ports that it's here for the long stay. And cruise ships will be around for many, many years because, and for the next 20, 30 years, they're getting their house in order in relation to emissions. And they're now, there's an age profile of people cruising. It's a safe, value for money industry that's going to be around for a long time.
Thank you, Michael. And that leads me on just to ask Conor, just coming from the perspective of, you know, Port of Cork, which has had significant growth in the cruise industry over the last number of years and, you know, has invested in the industry, that, you know, what should the policymakers now be considering, Conor, in terms of their approach to the industry and to get the industry back up and running in Ireland?
Thanks, Adele. I think I touched on it slightly when I presented, but certainly what I would suggest needs to be looked at is cruise needs to be viewed in a very different manner. And I think the response of the government during the COVID issues really articulated that we're really not high up on the government's and the policymakers' agenda when it comes to tourism. Now that's partly our fault as well. So what we need to do as a body in Ireland is we need to put ourselves in a more structured way. But what we also need is we need to the policymakers to understand and realise the benefits that cruise brings to this country in terms. And I think that opening comment about the fact that cruise brings tourists here to give them the taste, but that encourages them and gives them the appetite to come back. I think that's hugely missed. And I mentioned the bed night piece. So the first things first is a recognition of the benefit, the economic benefit that cruise, particularly the economic benefit that cruise brings to the island. And secondly, is some practical support. So the reality is the island of Ireland as a cruise destination has been damaged. So we need to get back out there and we need to be able to promote the island itself in a meaningful way. And to do that, the ports that are heavily involved in cruise, and they are Belfast, they are Galway, ourselves here in Cork and Waterford, we need the support to get out there along with the other members of Cruise Ireland and all the associated cruise activities and promote Ireland abroad, and that needs funding. So there's two things there. There's the practical funding support to get back out there, and there's the recognition in particular that cruise plays a significant and vital role in the tourism industry in this country.
Thanks, Conor. Two key points there, and I'd love if we could actually have another 20 minutes to go through this on the panel, but unfortunately we don't. But I think it's very interesting comments there from both yourself and Michael, just in terms of how to get the industry back up and running and protect its future. And just on that note, Lewis, I just want to come back to you just for a quick comment, just on, you mentioned about the future consumer. So, you know, and what we should be considering in terms of the demands of the future consumer and the future cruise passenger. Is there anything else you would like to add on that, Lewis?
No, thank you. Well, I think the big changes would be, of course, the environment. But people, they want to keep traveling. I think nowadays leisure times are, as eating or drinking, it's very important. So people will keep traveling, and because of the strong connection with water, between the human being and water, of course, that coastal tourism will keep being very important. I think it will be very strategic for ports to start adapting faster to climate change, to start being more sustainable, to have some certifications, environment and social certification, because I think in the future, tourists will start trying to inform better about what they are doing, if they are doing in a sustainable way. And not only cruises need to improve, and they are improving, but of course there's still something to do. But at the same time, the ports, it's very important to these future clients, and they are start already traveling. And this is the situation that, because I would usually on my classes, I say that, and I call the new tourist, it's a concept from the tourism area, that the new tourists are this group of tourists that they don't want to be part of the group of the tourists. And they are getting a large number because they are more experienced, they are an important tourist, and destinations, they want to receive this type of tourists. So if cruise tourism want to be strategic, I think that cruise lines, seaports, marinas, and the destination stakeholders, they need to work together. And
okay, thank you, Lewis. And I think that's a really important point, and I think it's something that will need to be considered by those targeting the cruise sector over the next number of years. Juan Luis, just for a final point, we've been talking about the role of policymakers in this and looking at the economic impact, and you touched on that a lot in your presentation in terms of how to, I suppose, capture the full economic value of the industry. Is there a final point you want to make on that, Juan Luis?
Yeah, thank you, Del. Just to wrap up, basically, I think the issue here is to get a win-win situation between the cruise industry and the destinations, and destinations can improve in that sense, especially as I was saying before, with digitalization, the possibility of unbundling the products, so that tourists can maybe, just in some places, maybe possible in others not, but they may hop on or hop off a cruise and customize their own routes, as long as there is enough connectivity among cruise, not only the same company, but also among different cruise lines, and also as I was saying before, the different modes of transportation, especially air transportation. So this fly cruise connectivity can increase the number of passengers, because some tourists are complaining about the duration of berthing, which is not sufficient to participate in different onshore excursions. So the idea is to try to satisfy all kinds of tourists. Maybe more tourists will be more interested in cruising if they have the opportunity to spend a little more time at the destination. And it could be a win-win situation. Win-win because there could be more passengers for the cruise lines, and even more time that they can spend at the destination. So it can increase the length of stay at the destination, at the ports of call, and it can increase the added value of this kind of tourism. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan Luis. And I think that those points will have to be of key consideration. And I think it comes back to the original focus of this workshop is on the importance of connectivity and multimodal connectivity in terms of facilitating economic growth, both from a tourism perspective and a trade perspective. And I think your final points there really reinforce that. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and I would like to thank all our panelists for the excellent contribution that they have made here this afternoon and for taking the time to be here with us. I'm going to pass over now to my colleague, Dr. Paul Brewster, who is going to wrap up for us in terms of the key points from the session, and then Liam Lacey will close the workshop. So thank you all.
Thanks very much, Adele.
Thank you.
And thanks very much again to all the panelists. We were all treated, I think, to an eclectic mix of expert contributions there today. And I think, as everyone has said, connectivity builds on many of the other aspects that we've dealt with over recent workshops in the Atlantic strategy. And we build, I think, are seeing, us building on a lot of those areas to get a clear signal back to policy signals and to share expert views with industry and customers and every stakeholder in the port community to how we can continue to make our ports a success. And I think the title for me, Staying Connected for Trade, Tourism and Economic Growth, we're all aware here it has always been important, but especially now as we embark on the recovery from COVID, and definitely in certain parts of the Atlantic still dealing with ongoing volatility in trade due to Brexit. And the contributions from our expert speakers today highlighted for me yet again the vital role of ports in our national and regional economies. I suppose the economic downturn and the travel restrictions, the associated restrictions from COVID, pose significant challenges for maintaining connectivity, as we heard earlier, right across the Atlantic area and beyond, as we all know. I think maintaining a diverse range of route options and transport modes has meant that the shipping industry has been able to respond to the demand changes and the disruption. And that has been and should not be overlooked. It has been an enormous key to how we've dealt with the challenges in recent years. We heard some interesting case studies from both ends of the Atlantic arc, from Donegal down to the Canary Islands, and the role of ports as the primary source of connectivity in peripheral areas and also across all our regions was very clear. I think whether it's tourism, transshipment, fisheries, and emerging sectors like offshore wind, there is a diverse range of activities that will enable our ports to maintain the infrastructure and services required for connectivity that drives economic growth. It came as no surprise to all of us that climate challenges have been mentioned. These new drivers and emerging sectors like offshore wind will bring the role of our ports and the role of our regional ports in particular into sharper focus for policymakers. Our regional ports, as we heard, bring a number of competitive advantages to the table in this regard, in terms of multimodal connections such as rail, spare capacity, and flexibility to respond to all the different challenges that we will meet in the coming years. Our ports are also locations where many tourists arrive, and we've just heard a fascinating discussion about many aspects of cruise and marine tourism. Whether tourists arrive in ferries, cruise ships, yachts, to explore and enjoy the hospitality and many attractions available throughout the Atlantic area, it's clear the visitor numbers are significant, though the additional features of marine tourists are something that we can all, I think, do more to highlight to everyone, policymakers and society at large. You know, the lengths of stay, the return visits, and the spend across the entire chain. You know, I think there's lots of work to do in that area, to again reinforce the vital role that our ports and tourism through our ports plays in our economies. So today's workshop has reinforced for me the ability and the appetite of our port sector to lead the way in the recovery from the pandemic. They are, and we know that our entire ports community is ready, willing and able to take on the future challenges as well. It's also clear to me that enhanced cooperation across all stakeholders, including customers, operators at our ports, as well as policymakers at national and EU level, is going to be the key to enable our ports to continue to thrive. I know everyone here today look forward to supporting continued cooperation and collaboration between everyone here today and beyond. And thanks again for everyone's contribution. And I now hand over to our pillar coordinator, Liam Lacey, for some closing remarks.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. Two absolutely fascinating panel discussions that shed a great deal of light on issues, topical issues in the maritime industry as they relate to connectivity and recent events, as many panelists have referred to. Brexit and COVID have brought a very sharp focus to the need to keep our ports connected, to continue to make our ports more efficient, and through digitalisation to add to the infrastructural assets that we have in a technological sense to bring us together more tightly from a communications point of view. All of these things are hugely important and will feed into the report that we put together at the end of this series of workshops that take from the learnings and the outputs of each of the 4 workshops. So before I finish, there are a number of people I'd like to thank. I'm grateful to our speakers and panelists, all of whom are experts in their own fields, something that was abundantly clear from the quality of their contributions, and we're grateful to you all. I would like to thank Alina and Savas and members of the assistance mechanism for their support in putting today's event together. I would like to thank the members of the task force who were so supportive of our efforts to put the workshop together and helped in structuring the workshop and providing some of the expert speakers that you have heard. I'd like to thank Liz Gavin and Rachel Halls from the National Hub for their stellar work and assistance in preparing for today's event. And I'd like to thank my own colleagues. 2 of them were visible, that's Paul and Adele. In the background, Fiona Murphy is responsible for a lot of the coordination and did great work, but was out of sight. So I'm grateful to the 3 of you. And finally, I would like to thank our audience for listening today, for participating in the workshop. I would remind you that the last workshop will take place in October. We will be back to you with a date for that and details in due course. And at that workshop, we will deal with the subject of green ports and the issues relating to sustainability. But in addition to that, we will start to bring together the learnings from the first 3 workshops and the 4th one. We'll be relying heavily on Paul Brewster as rapporteur to try and tease out those themes that have emerged from the workshops and put them into some sort of coherent message that we will use in the report. So for now, everybody, obrigado e adios, merci et au revoir, gracias e adios, thank you, everybody, and goodbye for now.